Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Dr. Greg Hammer. Dr. Greg Hammer is a professor at Stanford University School of Medicine and also the author of the book, Gain Without Pain, The Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals. And you can find out more about Dr. Greg Hammer and his wonderful work at his website, greghammermd.com. Welcome, Dr. Hammer.
Great to be with you again.
So if in case you missed it, we did a wonderful interview with Dr. Greg Hammer for the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio about the vagus nerve, which is really the key for all of us to learn how to be more relaxed. And we all need to have more relaxation in our lives. So your book, Gain Without Pain, is basically a handbook about how to overcome burnout. What exactly is burnout?
Burnout, Catherine, is simply a manifestation of chronic stress. It is the emotional and physical state of exhaustion, fatigue due to chronic stress. So, of course, chronic stress has many, many adverse effects on our physiology, on our bodies, and we feel those as fatigue and frankly, aging. So stress is not good for us. Let's put it that way. And I think we all know that.
Okay, great explanation. Now, one of my 10 books is on a similar subject. One of my books, 10 books, is called Unlimited Energy Now. And in Unlimited Energy Now, I talk about the 3 stages of adrenal burnout and what you may be experiencing at these different stages, because there are different stages of burnout. There's a lot of people who are walking around tired but wired. And then Unlimited Energy Now goes through what I refer to as the 5 levels of healing. What you can do on the physical level, on the energetic, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels. Because in my view as a medical intuitive healer, when you want to supercharge your healing, you work on all 5 levels. Right? Not just the physical. So Dr. Greg Hammer, why do you feel that burnout is so prevalent these days?
That's a good question, Catherine. I think, first of all, that life itself at a baseline, even under pretty much the best of circumstances, is stressful. We struggle with emotional, spiritual questions. What is our purpose? We feel separate from other people. We wonder what it means to be born, to live and die. We have properties with respect to the way our brains are wired that cause us to be stressed and prevent us from being fully happy, which I do believe is our true nature. And those things, those qualities, those ways that our brains are wired include we have a negativity bias. So we tend to very much remember and hold on to the negative and forget about the positive. And we all do this. Most of us think this is our dirty little secret, that we have depression, that we look at things in a negative way. It's not our dirty little secret. Our brains are wired this way. We're all like that. Our brains are also wired to be very distracted. And that means we have a very hard time experiencing the fullness of the present moment. Our brains sort of automatically go to the future. We start to worry about the things we have to do today, tomorrow. We're worried about what's going to happen to us or our children, other people that we care about. Our brains also naturally go to the past, and combined with our negativity bias, we often generate regret, shame. We remember things we did or said and we're embarrassed. This leads to low self-esteem. And these two are all really manifestations of stress. Our negativity and overthinking of the future leads to fear and anxiety. Our negativity with regard to our ruminations over the past leads to, as I said, shame and regret, low self-esteem. And these are states of stress. So life at a baseline is stressful. And then you superimpose upon that things that are happening in the world around us. And as you know, the world really does not comport with our apparent wants and needs. So this difference between what we think we want and need and what's actually happening around us causes friction in our lives. It causes stress. So again, life at a baseline is stressful, but when you superimpose the things that have been happening, particularly I think in the last 5 years or so in our world, obviously the pandemic, which has had such a devastating effect on so many people, we've lost loved ones. Our children have missed out on important experiences in school where they've had to do distance learning, and they've not had athletic events. They've not had their prom. They've not had their graduation ceremonies. We could go on and on about the adverse effects of the pandemic. It's manifest at work. Working remotely has its advantages, but it certainly has its disadvantages. We become somewhat disconnected from other people. We have new challenges staying home and working, many of us. There are just so many things that have happened recently. The gun violence in this country, where kids have to worry about whether they should wear a bulletproof vest when they go to school, and parents worry about their kids' safety. The political divide, which we hear about. You just turn on CNN or whatever your home cable station is. All you hear about is this extreme divergence in political views and animosity, and this filters down to everybody. It just seems like nothing good is happening in politics or around the world. We have war, of course. The war in Ukraine, I think, weighs on all of us. We try to resist it. We try to turn it off, but it's the horrors of a country being invaded. So there's all these superimposed events in the world that add to our stress level. So, stress is just so prevalent right now. People are burned out. Their patience is wearing thin. They're suffering from fear, anxiety, and depression. So again, these are all, I think, sources of our baseline levels of stress, and then superimposed world events and things happening in our culture that really magnify our level of stress.
Now, Dr. Greg Hammer, your book is subtitled The Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals. From your knowledge and experience, what professions are most likely to experience burnout?
Wow, that's a good question. The book was written in response to the growing prevalence of burnout amongst physicians and other healthcare professionals, nurses, respiratory therapists, social workers, administrators in the hospital. It was written before the pandemic. It came out just as the pandemic was really winding up in May of 2020.
Yeah.
If I had it to go over again, I probably would have changed the subtitle, because the book is really, the principles in the book are applicable to all of us all the time. And we can talk more about the gain practice and what those elements are. But, I think that so many different areas of work life have been adversely affected and are rife with burnout these days, Catherine. So, I hesitate to even begin to generate a list. I think that, again, I would just go back to my prior comments that burnout is so prevalent in our society. It really cuts across all lines of profession and career.
The reason that I wrote my book, Unlimited Energy Now, is that whenever I have new clients, one of the most common side effects that people come to me to need help about is because everyone's so exhausted from all the stress. And when I do medical intuitive readings, the first thing that I look at for anybody when I'm doing a medical intuitive reading is, what is your life energy? What is what I call your chi level, right? And when we're constantly exhausted, when we're living in a state of burnout, that erodes our personal chi. And when you have less life energy, then there's less energy to enjoy, right? And most of my clients, I would say that 100% of my clients who are in stage 3 of adrenal burnout, which is the final stage, they're all depressed. And a lot of my clients, I'm like, you're not crazy, you're just exhausted. And that really makes sense to them. You're not mentally ill, you're just exhausted. So, Dr.
Absolutely. I fully agree that exhaustion, really, it's the root cause of exhaustion, which is chronic stress. Has so many adverse effects on the cells in our body, the way cells interact, our nervous system, our organ function, our endocrine function, our immune function, our cardiovascular function, the way we think and behave and react. So stress has universal effects. And, we should differentiate between acute stress and chronic stress. What we're really discussing is chronic stress. Acute stress is actually adaptive. So what is acute stress? That is when we have an event, like typically people refer to the threat of a predator, being chased by a predator. So we're probably going back, 50, 75,000 years, although we could still be chased by predators today, of course. If we're taking a hike and there's a mother bear with her cubs, of course, lots of bells go off and our stress level goes acutely high. But when we're in a state of threat, or when we have to rise to an occasion, like we're at a pool party and a toddler falls in the pool, we suddenly have this surge of adrenaline, our blood sugar goes up. This is more energy to fuel our brain and our muscles. The fact that our blood pressure goes up, our heart is pumping more blood to our brain and to our muscles, away from places like our digestive system, which are much less important in a state of acute stress. All these physiologic responses occur, which are adaptive in the short term. They help us run away from the predator. They help us have the surge of energy to jump in the pool and rescue the toddler. The problem is, how quickly do those stress responses return to baseline? In other words, how quickly do those stress responses disappear? And how quickly can we go back to our baseline level of cardiovascular tone? For example, we talked about the vagus nerve helping to bring us back into homeostasis. So how quickly can we return to our functional baseline? And the problem is that when we are subjected to stressful thoughts and events, and we become stressed chronically, when we never return, or when we seldom return to our baseline level of adrenaline and heart rate and blood pressure and blood sugar, our level of cortisol, then we start to suffer from the ill effects of chronic stress. And those are really widespread throughout the way our body functions, and even induces aging, changes associated with aging in our cells and our chromosomes and our genes. So this is the distinction between acute stress and chronic stress. And what we're really talking about with fatigue is chronic stress.
So for our audience, whenever I'm working with clients and I'm wanting an individual to really appreciate the cumulative effects of stress in their life, I direct people to something called the Holmes and Ray stress scale. So I believe that's HOLMES and Ray RAHE stress scale. And you can just go to Google or Wikipedia and look up the Holmes and Ray stress scale. And it has a list of stressful events, death of a spouse, divorce, moving, jail time, traffic accidents, new school, new social activities. And what you do is you go through the past year of your life and you make mental notes of all the major events. Like we all went through Christmas, for example. That's a stressful event that registers on the Holmes and Ray stress scale. So you add up your numbers And whenever your total number on the HomeSense stress scale is over 300, then you're more likely to experience adverse health outcomes. So when I get my clients to look at this, and you self-report, and then if your number is over 300, then you know, okay, my past year has been ridiculously stressful, and I need to take active steps to reduce my stress. So this could be joining a yoga class, spending more time in nature, breathing exercises. So Dr. Hammer talked about the importance of breath work for activating the vagus nerve, taking time off, creating space in your day. So with that, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author, and we're learning about how to overcome burnout with Dr. Greg Hammer. Dr. Greg Hammer. So let's say someone's listening to this program and they went to the HomeSense stress scale and they go, okay, I'm burned out. The past year has been ridiculously hard. And also the HomeSense stress scale doesn't include things like surviving a pandemic, or breaking up with your girlfriend or boyfriend when you're a teenager, right? There's a lot of stressful events not listed on now, okay, or living through the war if you're living in Ukraine. So let's say that someone recognizes that they are in burnout. What are the essential ingredients for reducing the incidence of burnout? What can we do to become more resilient?
Great question. And I would just emphasize that, of course, burnout is not a black and white issue, a yes or no issue. So it's not, we don't either have a score over 300 or under 300 and that's it. I think if we just check in with ourselves and, for example, we close our eyes and begin to take a few deep breaths, how distracted are we? How quickly does our mind go to the list of things we need to do today, or to some uncomfortable experience, something negative? So if we just check in with ourselves, I think we can, without generating a numeric score necessarily, just we can understand how stressed we are. How impatient have we been? Have we snapped at our children? Have we, had a negative interaction with a friend? So there's so many signs of burnout. So I think you raise, I like the word resilience, because what we're really talking about is how can we be more resilient and healthy? And that's really what we all want, because what we really, truly all desire is happiness. And to be happy, we have to take care of our bodies and take care of our spirit. And this is going to resilience. So the world, again, does not necessarily comport with our apparent wants and needs. This generates stress. How do we cope with that? How do we become more resilient? And I would say there are really two domains, and I try to keep things as simple as possible. The GAIN acronym has 4 elements. If it's more than 4, I personally have a hard time remembering it. When I studied Buddhism, the 12 ways of this or the 10 steps of that, and a lot of Sanskrit words, it was just, I recognized I love the principles, but I couldn't really remember all of the numeric, the list of things I was supposed to remember. So I try to keep it very simple. So really there's 2 domains. There's our physical well-being and our physical resilience, if you will. And then there's our, I would just call it spiritual. You can call it emotional, psychological, what have you, domain. That's it. Very simple. Our physical and our spiritual domains. In the physical domain, to become more resilient, there are three elements, and they're well known to all of us. And you can put them in any order you like in terms of importance. I think they're equally important, and they are sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And, diet, nutrition. I'm a scientist. My undergraduate degree is in nutritional biochemistry. On any level you like, there's nutrition. So sleep, exercise, and nutrition. Those are the elements of physical resilience. And we can go into detail on all of those if you like, if we have time. But it's hard to be spiritually well and present and residing with happiness, which is in the present moment, if we are sleep deprived, if our bodies are not relatively fit, if we know that we're eating the wrong things, and again, our bodies are not as well as they can be. So we need to take care of our bodies, and then we can focus on our spirit. And to me, spiritual and emotional resilience is rather simple. You need to have a plan. And the plan that I practice and teach is the GAIN practice, and we can talk about that. So I think first it's important to kind of have a baseline that we're discussing our physical bodies and our spiritual wellness as well when we talk about resilience.
Beautiful. Now, here we are at the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio, and there is a natural healing remedy that is available. It's inexpensive. It's a Bach flower remedy called olive. So flower essences are made from flowers. They have no negative side effects, and they work on the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects. So what is olive about? Olive is a remedy for when your physical forces are entirely spent and you have to reach to the spiritual world to keep going. So olive is a great remedy if you're listening to this program and you realize that your physical forces are entirely spent. Now, Dr. Greg Hammer, you have come up with an acronym GAIN to help you describe for your students and your readers your approach to coming out of burnout. So what is the acronym GAIN about, and how can you explain that for our audience?
Sure. GAIN is an acronym for what I think are the four pillars of emotional and spiritual well-being, of resilience. The acronym GAIN stands for gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And I think these are all interrelated. They're all equally important, and they are most certainly not of my own device. So these are universally embraced principles. They appear in every spiritual and religious tradition of which I'm familiar. And I think they are really the essence of our spiritual well-being and resilience.
Beautiful. Now, you have put together a GAIN meditation. Can you describe for our audience what that is exactly?
Sure. Well, the GAIN practice begins in the morning. We awaken, we get out of bed, we open the blinds. There may or may not be light. In this part of the world, the light is gradually fading in the morning at a particular hour as we approach winter. And we open the blinds, we do our morning hygiene, and then we simply find a comfortable place to sit, and hopefully a quiet place. But many people, we're going to do a very brief meditation to start the day and really embrace the GAIN practice. And let's dispel some of the misconceptions about meditation. Meditation does not have to take 30 minutes. It does not have to involve sitting in an uncomfortable position. It does not have to mean not scratching an itch. It is not the barring of all thoughts, the banishing of all thoughts from our minds. That's impossible. So instead, I'm going to give you a brief form of meditation, which is very simple and easy to reference. And I'm going to actually give you things to focus on. So I'm not asking you to banish all thoughts from your mind. I'm just going to give you a guided sequence of thoughts on which to focus. And so I think we can all do that, especially for a period of 3 minutes or so. So we've awakened, we've opened the blinds, we've done our morning thing in the bathroom, just thrown some water on our face, what have you. We find a comfortable place to sit. We close our eyes. We begin slow, deep, intentional breathing. And we talked about this with regard to activating the vagus nerve. So we are activating the vagus nerve by breathing in this fashion. And so a simple way to do this is to breathe in through the nose, slowly to a count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Pause to a count of 3. And then release the breath effortlessly and slowly through the nose or mouth to a count of 4. So if each count is 1 second, our breathing cycle is now 10 seconds. In to a count of 3, pausing to a count of 3, breathing out effortlessly to a count of 4. So for that cycle is 10 seconds. Our respiratory rate is 6 per minute. So it's certainly slower than our usual respiratory rate of 10 or 12. So we're breathing slowly and deeply, and we do this for a few cycles. We're activating the vagus nerve. As you and I discussed before, our heart rate is slowing down, our blood pressure is reducing, our serum cortisol is going down, so our blood sugar is going down, and all kinds of positive changes are happening with our physiology as we do this simple, deep breathing through our nose into our belly. And then we go to the gain elements. So we think about gratitude. We simply think about the things for which we're grateful. So personally, I'm breathing deeply and slowly, and my first acknowledgement of gratitude is gratitude for this day. As my friend Doug would say, I'm on the right side of the grass today. I'm happy to be alive today. This day is a gift. I'm grateful for this day. I'm grateful for my relative health. It's not perfect, but it sure could be worse. I'm grateful for the loved ones in my life, my friends, my community. This morning, I emphasized my dog, who was curled up next to me on my bed all night. There's so many things for which to be grateful. Personally, I'm grateful for the work that I do, the ability to teach and help people. So we all have so much for which to be grateful in our lives. Then we transition to the A in gain, which is acceptance. And this is really an acknowledgement of the pain we all experience in life. And as I may have mentioned last time, I lost my son at the age of 29, 6 years ago. And that pain is not going away. However, there's a formula in the book, which is suffering equals pain times resistance. We love formulas in medicine. So the pain is fixed, it's there, but the resistance is optional. And let's consider acceptance the inverse or the opposite of resistance. So if we fully accept, i.e., lower our resistance towards 0, our suffering goes towards 0, even though the pain is still there. So the pain is there and it's part of life, but the suffering is largely optional. So we take an uncomfortable experience, maybe a painful experience, and we focus on that experience and we bring it closer and closer, open our chest, open our heart, bring this uncomfortable or painful experience into our heart, envelop it and nurture it with our heart and sit with it as we breathe slowly and deeply. We're sort of breathing in this experience. We're actually nurturing this experience. And eventually we will ask ourselves, can I live with this pain forever? And the answer is yes. We've accepted it. We move on to the I in gain, which is intention. And as I said, our brains are wired to be negative and very distracted. So let's focus our attention first on the present moment. We can experience the pressure of the chair against our body, the subtle tingling at the soles of our feet. What we're hearing, maybe we hear a plane going by in the distance. We can experience the slightly sweet sensation of the air that we're breathing. And we sit with these sensations, these experiences, these perceptions as our present experience, the only one we ever really know. And then we also focus our intention on looking at things from a happier perspective. So our intention is to, the next time we're feeling very negative about something, look on the optimistic, pragmatic side of whatever that is. And we pledge to be generous, kind, and loving. And these are our intentions. And then we transition to the end in gain, which is non-judgment. And of course, our brains are always analyzing and often judging. And with our negativity bias, we often judge things and people negatively. Most importantly, ourselves. We are our own most harsh critic. There's lots of science to back that up. So here we focus on non-judgment. And one way to do this is to conceive of an image of the Earth apparently suspended in space. One of these beautiful NASA images, the clouds covering part of the Earth, the blueness of the oceans, the land. We can imagine there's people doing their thing down on the surface. The Earth is beautiful, but it's just a planet. It is intrinsically neither good nor bad. So we focus on this. The Earth is neither good nor bad. The Earth is simply the planet that it is. And so it's only logical for me to think, I am just a human being. I am just the person that I am. I am neither good nor bad. And we link this again to the breath. We focus on our deep, slow breathing as we nurture the experience. I am simply the person that I am. I am neither good nor bad. And we transition to just simply I am. And we breathe with this I amness. And then we just simply focus purely on our breath, slowly in, pausing, slowly and without effort, exhaling. And we repeat the focus on the breath a few times, and then we slowly open our eyes and we're ready to go out in the world. And the really magical thing about this, Catherine, is we have learned to breathe deeply, slowly, activate the vagus nerve, and we've linked these other essential ingredients to happiness to our breath, to our gratitude, our acceptance, our intention, our non-judgment. So now I'm at work, I'm walking down the hall, I'm going to meet with my chairman. I notice my heart rate is up, I'm feeling a little nervous. I simply bring my focus as I'm walking down the hall to my breath, slowly in through my nose, pausing, exhaling. And I feel, since I'm a gain practitioner, but this comes pretty quickly after a few weeks of doing this practice, I feel the gratitude, the acceptance, the intention, non-judgment, because they're associated with my focus on this slow, deep breathing. You know, this is like a conditioned response. And what we're doing is we are rewiring our brains. Again, you know, our brains have these qualities of negativity, of distraction, difficulty being present. We're rewiring our brains to be present more and more of the time. And we can go to that feeling and experience of being present more easily over time. And we're looking at the world with a more positive perspective. That's what this practice is all about. We're rewiring our brain. Baby steps, a little bit every day. Our brains evolved to be the way they are over tens of thousands of years, and we're not going to change them overnight. All we want to do is be on the path toward more happiness, more resilience, less chronic stress, more adaptation, greater happiness. It's a process. There is no end. I heard somebody say that happiness is not a state, it's a process. And so if somebody asks you, or we ask ourselves, are we happy? This is a nonsensical question, because we all experience stress. We all have times when we feel very positive and a lot of times when we don't. So are we happy? I would just submit that happiness is a process. It's not a destination. So if I ask myself if I'm happy, there is no answer. The premise of the question is nonsensical. But in any case, what we're doing, Catherine, is we're rewiring our brains in these magical ways. And it's a very simple practice. And I think that's really how we can become more resilient, through simple practices, caring for our body. Again, the sleep, exercise, nutrition fundamentals are very simple. And this practice, this gain practice for our spiritual and emotional well-being, is also very simple. And I think that's essential.
Beautiful information. Let's take a break and listen to another message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author, and we're learning about how to overcome burnout. Dr. Greg Hammer, here at the Natural Healing Show, we interview experts on natural healing from all over the world. And one of the people that I had the privilege of interviewing was the founder of an app called Joy Plus. And he said the two fundamentals for feeling happy are gratitude, which you talk about in your gain meditation, and also optimism, having something to look forward to. So this kind of information that you're sharing is really useful for all of us, so that we can get some perspective on how can I be more engaged in the process of happiness. Now, one of the things that I love is you've come up with this equation: suffering equals pain times resistance. One of my 10 books is called The Difference Between Pain and Suffering. And which is a handbook about how people can get out of pain naturally without drugs. Because before the pandemic, one of the leading causes of death in Americans under 50 was drug overdose. And we're still dealing with a tremendous amount of drug overdoses. So will you explain for us more about your equation of suffering equals pain times resistance? How can we use that equation to experience less suffering?
Good question, Catherine. We can just go to the variable on the right side of the equation, if you will. Suffering equals pain times resistance. Resistance is the variable. The pain is there, but the resistance is optional. So how do we lower our resistance? Really, if we want to go into the next step of the math, resistance equals 1 over acceptance, or acceptance equals 1 over resistance. So now we have suffering equals pain divided by acceptance. So if we make acceptance big, that number, pain over acceptance, gets small, our suffering is reduced. So you talk about an individual that stressed gratitude and optimism. And the reason that in the gain practice, the G for gratitude is followed by acceptance, intention, and non-judgment is that simply focusing on gratitude might give one the impression that what's recommended is just being grateful. And I think that can be interpreted as life is just a bowl of cherries. I'm just grateful for everything all the time. And I think that can be a form of resistance if we don't address the other elements in gain. And so I think let's talk about the second one, which is acceptance. Again, I do think we need to pay attention to the painful, uncomfortable experiences in our lives. We need to cope with them. When I decided to go into cardiac anesthesiology and intensive care medicine for children, I knew I would be dealing with a lot of death and dying. And people said, well, you can't get too close to your patients because it'll break your heart. And my feeling was, no, that doesn't resonate with me. I want to be close to my patients. I want to be close to their families. So the remedy is to focus on accepting the death and dying that we all experience. It's universal. None of us gets out of this alive. So I decided to really focus on acceptance of the death and dying that I would be experiencing in my patients and their families, and in my own family and myself ultimately. That was my approach to being more resilient as a practitioner caring for critically ill babies, infants, and children. And so I really took this head on. I sat with it. I meditated with this idea of acceptance of our mortality and pain. And this made me much better to deal with the processes of dying and death that my patients and their families experience, and also in my own life. So again, this is the practice of acceptance. It requires a plan. It requires purposefulness. It requires the A and the I in gain, which is intention. So I think it's not sufficient just to be grateful. It's requisite, but it's not sufficient. So we need to focus on gratitude, but we also need to focus on acceptance. And I don't mean we kind of spend our days thinking about painful experiences, but we need to the extent that we find adaptive in our own lives, we do need to sit with these uncomfortable sensations and painful experiences and bring them close, bring them into our heart, sit with them, and learn how to let the sensation sort of dissolve. And I think so, again, I think the elements of gratitude, acceptance, intention to be grateful, intention to be accepting, this requires a plan, a practice, intention, and also non-judgment is essential. So gratitude is essential, but not sufficient. And you know, I'm not really saying anything that we all don't know already. There's nothing new in this. I start in the book that my first book, it starts out by saying there's nothing new in this book. So these are all things we already know. We just have to put them together and practice them. And so that's why I think if we want to be fully accepting and lower that resistance and decrease our suffering, suffering equals pain times resistance, lowering our resistance through acceptance decreases our suffering, we need to kind of embrace these four elements.
I just love your simple explanations. And I love those two equations: suffering equals pain times resistance, and suffering equals pain divided by acceptance. And I remember years ago, I went to the dentist and they were like, okay, you've got some problems in your teeth. Anyway, long story, the dentist damaged the nerves in my mouth and in my teeth. My brother, who's a medical doctor, diagnosed me. He said, you have trigeminal neuralgia, which according to the medical literature is the most painful condition known to man, also known as the suicide disease, because when people can't get out of it, they commit suicide. So I had a personal experience of really dealing with intense pain. And if there was even like a slight breeze that went by my face, it swept up. I remember going to the health food store and asking for guidance about the homeopathy, and it was like, oh yeah, that one. And I looked at it and it was like, when your teeth feel so bad you feel like screaming. I was like, yep, that's one for sure. And but one of the things that I did was, and I read about this, was actually meditating on accepting the pain, because so many of us self-medicate. It's why, you know, we're living in a world full of drug addicts, because people are numbing the pain rather than developing the inner strength to accept that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So I spent some time really meditating on feeling the pain. You know, eventually, thank God, I remember I had some 2 root canals, and the root canal surgeries, I remember they put 5 shots of Novocaine in my mouth, and I could still feel the pain. They couldn't even believe it, but it was really intense. But so I can affirm from personal experience what Dr. Hammer is talking about, is really spending time focusing on accepting what is, right? And the more that we resist, and even when I work with clients who are in pain, it's quite interesting to me, because I'll have some people who, could be on, the heaviest pain medications there are, and yet they found acceptance, they found peace. And other people who are bothered, they're the princess and the pea, the slightest disturbance, and they're, and they have trouble handling it. So Dr. Hammer, I appreciate your work. And you mentioned earlier that you had studied Buddhism. So what school of Buddhism did you study, and how did it inform the development of this philosophy?
Well, I studied, and I don't consider myself a scholar by any means, but I studied Mahayana Buddhism as an undergraduate at Northwestern University. And then many years later, about 12 years ago, I discovered something called Advaita Vedanta, which comes from the Hindu tradition, but is in its current practice that most of us embrace is very much affected by Mahayana Buddhism. And the idea is that we are not a separate self. We're all made of consciousness. We are like an eddy in the stream. So the stream is the universe, if you will. The stream is consciousness, it's God, and we're just a little minor eddy in that stream. We can't be taken out of the water. We're made of the water, and we apparently appear and then later disappear, but we really haven't appeared or disappeared. We've never been separate. So this idea of not really being separate comes from the Buddhist tradition, and is now a central part of Advaita. And this has really been the focus of my spiritual life since then. And, going back to your trigeminal neuralgia, so many of us have had pain. I had chronic back pain and hip and leg pain from nerve impingement in my back for 10 years. It gradually was becoming worse. And then I had a very successful operation several years ago. And it's a source of tremendous gratitude, actually. But when I was having the pain, rather than try to medicate it away, and there is a role for pain medicine, I'm not saying there isn't, but it's not something that one should jump to first. Self-medicating is a form of resistance, right? And then other forms of resistance with chronic pain are, blaming somebody else, blaming your dentist, focusing on judgment of your dentist, for example. That's a form of resistance. So if you're really going to successfully cope with this pain, one might ask the question, who is that self experiencing the pain? So this is just one approach. And the Advaita approach would be, there is no separate self experiencing that pain. That pain is just a temporary manifestation of all that we experience in life. So the bottom line here, and the point I'm trying to make, is having a way to look at the pain, to cope with the pain, that involves intention, right? You have a plan for dealing with the pain with your full presence, not simply medicating it, not simply blaming whenever you feel the pain, but actually dealing with it with some degree of intention. And whatever your sort of emotional, psychological, spiritual approach is, it involves actually dealing with it head on and deciding that the way you're going to respond to this is through acceptance. You're ultimately going to accept this pain as part of life. And then, you can use the rest of the GAIN practice beside the A for acceptance. You can be grateful, even though you're having this awful facial pain, for the fact that your heart is working so well, your lungs are working so well, your kidneys are working so well. The rest of your body is functioning just as it should. So it certainly could be worse. You could have trigeminal neuralgia and back pain and kidney failure. So it's a way of dealing with it. It's a way of taking it on through intention, and it's the practice of acceptance. And I think that's what you were describing.
Beautiful information. And in my 30 years of experience in natural healing, what I find is that so many people turn to natural healing because they've taken all the drugs. I mean, I've got clients right now who are on the heaviest pain medications known to man, and they're still suffering. And it's because they haven't integrated what you're talking about. You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. Our guest today has been Dr. Greg Hammer. You can learn more about how to overcome burnout by reading his book, Gain Without Pain. And you can find out more about Dr. Greg Hammer and his wonderful work at his website, greghammermd.com. And remember, a simple way to overcome burnout is to engage the practice of GAIN, gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.